This week's Vince Russo rumor is that Dixie Carter actually invited him to return to the booking team once the negotiations with Hogan were put on hold, but that Russo actually turned her down. Apparently, Russo has made it known he's not interested in working with Jeff Jarrett. While it's always possible that Jarrett and Russo will work through their differences, one source said that won't be as easy as most people think it will be. Quote, "It's going to be very hard to mend fences with Jeff and Vince right now," said the source. The key to a Jarrett Russo reconciliation could be Glenn Gilberti, who's still on good terms with Russo while also being an active member of Jarrett's creative team. What's up with the falling out here? Was Vince feeling territorial that maybe you picked Hogan instead of him, or what's the issue?
Yeah, it was that was among other things. And again, to have complete clarity, I'm sure there were other issues there, but for the most part, creative was set up at this time. We did our show on Wednesday and Thursdays. We would all, and I say all, Jeremy Borash, Glenn Gilberti, Dixie, Jimmy Hart from time to time. I think Bill Banks was on board. I don't know if Mike Tenay was staying over yet. Dutch Mantel, of course. And so we kind of would get in the room and have our creative sessions on what are we going to do next week. Well, when the Hogan situation I don't say the end, but in 2003, he made it real clear up front. I'm not working with Russo. And you got to remember 2003 to 2000, back to what would that have been? July of 2000 and the litigation.
That's right.
There was super bad blood between Vince and Hulk, and Bob Carter wanted growth, and Hogan was one of a couple of ideas on growth, and those were his ground rules. And it was a business decision. I get it. I've taken business decisions personal more than once. Vince took it personal and looked at it that you're going to pick Hulk Hogan over me. Screw you. And that's kind of where he sat for a while.
I know you're a wrestling junkie. Did you happen to catch any of the interview or any of the clips on social of Chris Van Vliet talking to Brian Pillman Jr.?
Ooh, I don't. I see Chris Van Vliet stuff all the time. See, jog my memory, and I'll tell you if I've seen.
Well, I thought you would have been fascinated with this because he talked about, and he was sort of comparing AEW and WWE without actually saying that, but he was saying that in AEW there was a little more creative freedom, so he found himself pitching, sort of advocating for himself, whether it was him and Griff Garrison or adding a female to the mix and their presentation and all that sort of thing. Whereas he says in WWE, John Cena came and talked to him in NXT and spoke to the whole group and basically said, don't ever pitch any ideas. That's not your job. And when you pitch ideas, it rubs people who do that for a living the wrong way. So you can't control what your creative is going to be. You can only control how you're perceived to the people who do that creative. The idea being, whatever they hand you, just go crush it. And when he was making the analogy, when I was the rap guy, it was my job to be the best rap guy. And so when they needed a rap guy for a story, I'd be the best one. And I thought that was interesting, and an interesting way to sort of compare and contrast the different styles of wrestling, because on the independents, largely you are sort of coming up with some of your own creative. But when you get plugged into a system, whether it's an Impact or a WWE or an AEW, some of that creative is done for you. And I find that interesting as a topic to discuss, especially when it relates to like Hulk Hogan and Vince Russo. One guy famously always had creative control, and the other guy famously did not like that. You've seen it both ways. Where do you land on that? And I know you didn't actually hear it from the horse's mouth, but Brian Pillman via John Cena, just go run the play.
Yeah. I don't think we have enough time, Conrad, to get into this. But you know, what's my thought? I think that's your general question. What's my thoughts on it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I've heard okay, Conrad, it's a great topic, and we can maybe do a sidebar here. But I think if you really looked at Hulk Hogan's career, I bet he's more successful when he's being produced and he's not exercising his creative control. I think that goes across the board for any talent at all times. I can vividly remember on more than one occasion Dutch Mantell coming to me saying, "Hey, this guy's this and this guy's that. I don't think they want to do what you want, Jeff." Well, Dutch, what do you think? What do you think? And he goes, "I think you ought to go in there and tell them, hey, if you don't like it, get your own money and go start your own wrestling company like I did, and then come talk to me." Because, Dutch was, man, I can hear Eric Young and Bobby Roode because it became kind of a running joke. Dutch had a saying, "Hey, boys, just go run the effing play." Um,
Yeah.
I mean, just over and over and over. So I think the here's the what I think is optimal. I think a talent can um maybe not pitch. I hear where John's coming from, but collaborate after the pitch has been made and say, "Hey, baby, I can do it here better," or whatever. I think it's very, very important for talent to take something and make it their own. I mean, I think the best promos, Ric Flair or Roddy Piper or Jerry Lawler, have all come from a producer. My dad producing Lawler saying, "Hey, Jerry, kind of get to point A to point B to point C, but you do it the way you think you need to do it." And then they crush it. So I think everybody has to be produced. I think that's when the best work is done. Word for word, not a fan of that. A talent um, completely producing themselves, I think you miss the mark so many times. I know that I've been heavily criticized at times, this and that. People that were there, that were in the know, they will know that at the end of the day, I took input from anybody, but it's my company and I had to do what I thought was best. But I did not produce myself. Dutch and Vince and others, a lot of input. Here's my pet peeve on all of it. Once it's decided, and I like to have it decided, if not 24 hours, at least 2 or 3 days in advance, 24 hours at the very least. But when it becomes show day and you're still talking creative, it's impossible to run a successful play. It just doesn't work. It's a recipe for absolute failure. But generally speaking, Conrad, as you always ask me what time it is, and I'll tell you how to build a watch. I think run the play. I think Cena is spot on because in the world we live in, and I say in the professional wrestling world we live in, you have a 2 hour show. Friday night's a 1 hour show, but you have a show. If you only think about your segment and you have no idea what the other 6, 7, 8 segments are, it not only just bad continuity, bad context. It is such a choppy novel, if you will. It's like having 7 authors to a short story. It's impossibly good. It just is. It's the stew being made on Sunday afternoon. If you have 7 chefs go up and cook it, it's going to be terrible. So I'm a big proponent of run the damn play.
How do you and Vince Russo patch things up? It's written in the torch here in February that you guys are talking again. Talk to me about.
On this occasion, I don't remember any big reconciliation other than, "Hey, man, uh, you knew it wasn't personal." And he might have said, "Well, I took it personal and it was personal, but let's go to work." I don't remember any big um, uh, kiss and make up, hug. I don't remember any begrudgingly. I think it was, he's coming back to work. If I remember, yeah, he was still in Atlanta at the time. So, when he wasn't on board with us, he went back to his CD warehouse, or, we'll call it his day job. Again, in these early days, a full-time gig with TNA, there was just very few of us that were full-time.